Hello everyone, welcome to our channel with another horror story. Sit tight, grab your popcorn, and let's begin. This story is about a terrifying series of events that occurred in a small American town called Pinebrook in the year 1982. A once powerful family finds itself haunted by mysterious midnight phone calls, leading to gruesome deaths, and the secret behind it will leave you shocked. This story is the Midnight Calls. It was late summer in Pinebrook, a quiet, unassuming town in the Midwest. The rolling hills, thick forests, and sprawling farmlands gave the town a timeless charm, but beneath the surface lay a dark secret that had been buried for over a decade. The Simmons family, one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the town, was about to be torn apart by something they couldn't escape. An ancient curse tied to a murder that no one had spoken of in years. 10 years ago, Thomas Simmons, the patriarch of the family, had killed a man. The man's name was Jake Turner, a poor laborer who worked on the Simmons' vast farmland. He had been an honest, hard-working man, but an altercation between the two men had turned deadly. Turner had been accused of theft, a lie that Thomas had fabricated to cover up his crime. The truth was far more sinister. Turner had stumbled upon something Thomas didn't want anyone to know: evidence of his illegal dealings with corrupt officials to seize more land from the poor farmers of Pinebrook. When Turner confronted him, Thomas shot him in cold blood. As Turner lay dying in the fields, he cursed Thomas with his last breath. "You will suffer," he had whispered, his voice filled with hatred and pain. "One day, I will return, and I will destroy everything you hold dear. Your descendants will pay for your sins." Thomas had buried the truth and, with his wealth and power, manipulated the town's narrative, branding Turner as a thief and a violent man. No one questioned it, no one dared. The Simmons name was too powerful, too untouchable. But curses have a way of festering, growing stronger in silence. And after Thomas's death, it was time for the curse to take root. It began with the phone calls. Eliza Simmons, Thomas's granddaughter, was the first to receive one. It was midnight, and she had just settled into bed in her luxurious home on the edge of town. The phone rang, its sharp tone startling her. She hesitated before answering. Midnight calls were never good news. She lifted the receiver, but no one spoke. At first, there was only silence, and then a low, raspy voice whispered, "One by one, they will fall." Eliza's blood ran cold. She slammed the phone down, her heart racing. She told herself it was a prank, but deep down, something felt wrong. The voice had been filled with malice, with a promise of something dark. She tried to brush it off, but the unease stayed with her through the night. The next day, Eliza's younger brother Nathan received the same call. Midnight. The phone rang. Nathan answered, expecting to hear one of his friends on the other end, but instead he was met with that same chilling whisper, "You're next." Nathan, more skeptical than his sister, shrugged it off as a joke. But later that night, while walking through the family's wooded estate, Nathan heard something rustling in the trees above him. He glanced up, his flashlight sweeping across the branches, but he saw nothing. Then, out of nowhere, something heavy slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. He tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat as he felt cold, bony fingers wrap around his neck. His flashlight flickered wildly, illuminating a face. A grotesque, decaying face, with hollow black eyes and a mouth twisted in a sinister grin. It was Jake Turner. The spirit squeezed tighter and Nathan's vision began to blur. The last thing he saw was the ghostly figure of Turner standing over him, his body dissolving into the night as if it had never been there at all. Nathan's body was found the next morning. His neck snapped like a twig. The authorities were baffled. There was no sign of an attacker, no evidence of a struggle. Just a body, cold and lifeless. The deaths didn't stop there. One by one, members of the Simmons family started receiving the midnight calls. Each time, the voice on the other end whispered a chilling message, and within hours, another family member was found dead. Each death more brutal than the last. Eliza's cousin, Richard, was found hanging from a tree, his eyes wide with terror. The coroner said it was suicide, but Richard's friends swore he had no reason to take his own life. Then there was Martha, their aunt, who drowned in her bathtub despite never having filled it with water. The water seemed to come from nowhere, as if summoned by some malevolent force. The town was gripped with fear. Rumors began to spread, whispers of the curse that Jake Turner had placed on the Simmons family. But no one knew the full story. No one had ever dared to speak of what had really happened that day in the fields. Sheriff Donahue had been the town's lawman for over 20 years. He was a man of logic and reason, but even he couldn't ignore the strange pattern of deaths surrounding the Simmons family. The phone calls, the whispers, the unexplained murders. It all pointed to something far beyond the realm of the natural. When the sheriff started investigating, he found something strange. The phone calls weren't coming from any listed number. They didn't show up on the call logs, and there was no trace of where they originated. It was as if they were coming from nowhere. That's when he decided to visit Old Margaret. Old Margaret was Pinebrook's local oracle. At least, that's what people called her. She was a strange, reclusive woman who lived in a cabin deep in the woods. Most people dismissed her as a crazy old woman, but the sheriff knew better. Margaret had seen things that couldn't be explained. When he arrived at her cabin, she was waiting for him. "It's the curse, isn't it?" she said, her voice raspy and dry. "The one placed by Jake Turner. I knew this day would come." Sheriff Donahue sat across from her, his hands trembling slightly. "What do I do? How do I stop it?" Margaret leaned in, her eyes glowing with an eerie intensity. "You can't stop it. The curse will run its course unless the truth is revealed." Thomas Simmons lied about what happened that day. He branded Jake Turner a thief, a criminal, to cover up his own sins. The only way to lift the curse is to reveal the truth, to tell the town what really happened, to erase the injustice that was done to Jake Turner. The sheriff left Margaret's cabin, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do, but he also knew the Simmons family wouldn't be so willing to air their dirty laundry. They had spent years building their reputation, hiding the sins of their ancestors. But time was running out. The midnight calls were becoming more frequent, and more bodies were piling up. Sheriff Donahue gathered the remaining members of the Simmons family: Eliza, her mother Caroline, and her uncle Robert. He told them everything: the curse, the murders, and the only way to stop it. At first, they refused to believe him. They called him crazy, accused him of trying to destroy their family, but as the clock ticked toward midnight, they began to feel the weight of the curse bearing down on them. Then the phone rang. Eliza picked it up, her hands shaking. The voice on the other end was cold and familiar. "You will all fall, one by one." Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. A cold wind swept through the house, rattling the windows. And then, they heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. Sheriff Donahue grabbed his gun, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't do any good. This was something beyond bullets and brute force. The ghost of Jake Turner had come for them. The door creaked open, and there he stood. A shadowy figure with hollow eyes, his face twisted with rage. He stepped toward them, his skeletal hand reaching out for Eliza. But before he could touch her, the sheriff stepped forward. "Jake," he said, his voice steady, "I know what happened. I know the truth. Thomas Simmons killed you, and he lied to cover it up. You were innocent. You didn't deserve to die." For a moment, the room was silent. The spirit of Jake Turner stopped in his tracks, his hand hovering in the air. Slowly, he turned to face the sheriff, his hollow eyes meeting Donahue's. The air grew thick with tension as the spirit seemed to weigh the sheriff's words. Then, with a sigh that sounded more like a gust of wind, Jake Turner began to fade, his figure dissolving into the darkness. The next morning, Sheriff Donahue held a press conference. He told the town everything. The truth about Jake Turner, the murder, the lies. The Simmons family, though reluctant, backed up his story, admitting their ancestors' guilt. The town, once under the shadow of the Simmons' power, was finally free from their control. The curse had been lifted, and as the sun set on Pinebrook, for the first time in years, the phone lines were silent.